I always say that I never sang any style of music that I hadn't heard in my household growing up. I can't approach it with any kind of authenticity.
She had one of the most versatile voices in American music: country, rock, opera, mariachi, the Great American Songbook. But Linda Ronstadt's story was never really a solo act. Behind almost every turn in her career was another musician. Someone who pushed her, believed in her, doubted her, or changed her direction entirely. Now in her late 70s, living with a diagnosis that took away her ability to sing, Ronstadt has had decades to reflect on who those people were. This is the real story, not gossip, not invented feuds, but the documented account of 7 musicians who left a mark on her life and her music. Before there were hit records, there was a producer named John Boylan, and without him, almost none of what came next would have happened. In 1971, Ronstadt was a rising country rock singer 3 albums into her career, and she needed a backing band for a summer tour. Boylan, who managed and produced her at the time, went to work assembling one, scouting Los Angeles clubs for talent. Ronstadt herself later told the story of walking into the Troubadour on a Monday night with Boylan and hearing a band called Shiloh playing her own arrangement of Silver Threads and Golden Needles, note for note, guitar solo included. So I thought, maybe I can just hire this band, they already know the arrangements, she recalled. That's how she found her drummer, a Texan named Don Henley. She still needed a guitarist, and found one already standing nearby, playing in a duo with her boyfriend at the time, J.D. Souther. His name was Glenn Frey. Boylan suggested Randy Meisner on bass, and Ronstadt herself suggested Bernie Leadon. None of that was an accident, and none of it was owed to luck. Boylan had the ear and the relationships to put 4 unproven session players in a room together, and Ronstadt had the platform to give them a stage. The 4 of them made their debut backing her at Disneyland on July 12, 1971, in front of an audience of graduating high schoolers who had no idea they were watching music history assemble itself under Sleeping Beauty's castle. Boylan's influence on Ronstadt's sound in those years, tight, harmony-driven, rooted in California country rock, became the blueprint for what came next. What happened next is one of the most famous handoffs in rock history, and Ronstadt has told the story many times. Always the same way, with pride, not bitterness. On the road that summer, rooming together because there wasn't enough money to put musicians in separate hotel rooms, Henley and Frey discovered they could write songs together. Frey started calling Henley his secret weapon. By the end of the tour, the 2 of them came to Ronstadt with an idea. They wanted to start their own band. I said, "That's a great idea," Ronstadt remembered. She didn't try to hold onto her lineup. She encouraged it. Manager Irving Azoff, who would go on to guide the Eagles to global superstardom, has said plainly that without Ronstadt and Boylan, the band simply would not exist. By 1972, the Eagles had a record deal with David Geffen's Asylum label. By the following year, they had Take It Easy and Witchy Woman on the radio. The relationship didn't end there, and it wasn't severed by resentment on either side. Ronstadt covered Desperado on her own album, Don't Cry Now. Years later, when she recorded her version of Roy Orbison's Blue Bayou for 1977's Simple Dreams, a single that hit number 2 on the charts and earned 2 Grammy nominations, it was Don Henley singing harmony behind her. In 2014, inducting Ronstadt into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Frey stood at the podium and told the world plainly that she, more than anyone, had helped them put the Eagles together. There was no feud here. There was a mentor who let her protégés go, and 2 men who never stopped crediting her for it. Before the Eagles existed, before Ronstadt was reshaping the troubadour scene, there was J.D. Souther, her boyfriend in the early 70s, and one of the quiet architects of the entire Laurel Canyon sound. Souther had been playing in a duo called Long Branch Pennywhistle with Glenn Frey, which is precisely how Ronstadt came to know Frey in the first place. She asked him to join her band because she'd heard him singing alongside her own boyfriend. Souther and Ronstadt's relationship wasn't just personal, it was creative. He was one of the era's most respected songwriters, later penning hits for the Eagles and Linda herself, including songs that would define her sound through the 70s. Their romance didn't last, but its influence on her catalog and her circle of collaborators did. It's easy to overlook how much of Ronstadt's musical network in that period ran through the people she loved, worked with, and trusted enough to bring into her band. and Souther sits at the center of that web. If John Boylan built Ronstadt's live band, it was Peter Asher, former half of the 60s pop duo Peter and Gordon, and later a hugely respected producer and manager, who built her as a hitmaker. Asher took over as her producer in the mid-1970s and steered her toward the sound that would make her one of the best-selling women in the history of American music. Polished, radio-ready rock and pop, built on classic songs given new arrangements. Under his direction, Ronstadt recorded You're No Good, When Will I Be Loved, and Heart Like a Wheel, the songs that turned her from a respected country rock singer into a bona fide superstar. Asher wasn't just a hired hand behind the board. He and Ronstadt developed one of the most enduring producer-artist partnerships in the business, one that stretched across genre changes for decades, long after most artists would have moved on to someone new. Their collaboration is a reminder that Ronstadt's commercial success in the 70s wasn't an accident of a great voice alone. It took a producer who understood exactly how to frame that voice for the widest possible audience, and who stuck with her as she kept changing what that audience was. By the early 1980s, Ronstadt was one of the biggest-selling artists in the country, and she chose that moment to do something her label considered close to career suicide. Record an album of pre-rock American standards, in the style of Frank Sinatra, arranged by the legendary Nelson Riddle, who had once arranged for Sinatra himself. The skepticism wasn't invented for a headline. It was real, and it was widespread. Industry executives worried a rock and pop audience would abandon her, and that older listeners of standards would never accept a rock singer trying on their genre. Riddle, for his part, was not interested in babying a pop star through unfamiliar material. Working with him meant Ronstadt had to hold her own in orchestral arrangements written for a completely different vocal tradition than the one that made her famous, with a conductor who had shaped the sound of the American songbook decades earlier and had little patience for shortcuts. The gamble paid off. What's new? The first of 3 albums she made with Riddle between 1983 and 1986 sold multi-platinum and introduced her to an entirely new audience, while critics, who had written her off as a rock singer playing dress-up, were forced to reconsider. Riddle died in 1985, partway through their collaboration, and Ronstadt has spoken since about how much she valued the chance to work with one of the last living links to that era of American orchestral pop before he was gone. Not every relationship in Ronstadt's career was defined by tension or hierarchy. Her bond with Dolly Parton and Emmylou Harris was, by every account, the opposite. A genuine, decades-long friendship between 3 of the most respected women in American music, built on mutual admiration rather than competition. The 3 had been talking about recording together since the mid-1970s, but scheduling conflicts, record label politics, and the sheer difficulty of coordinating 3 major solo careers kept pushing it back for nearly a decade. When Trio finally arrived in 1987, it became one of the most critically celebrated collaborative albums in country music history, blending 3 distinct voices into a sound none of them could have made alone. A second album, Trio 2, followed a decade later in 1999. Both women have spoken warmly about Ronstadt in interviews for years, describing a relationship built on trust rather than rivalry. A notable contrast to how the music industry often frames women artists working in overlapping spaces as competitors by default. For Ronstadt, the Trio records stand as proof that some of her most important creative partnerships were also simply close friendships. Few pairings looked less obvious on paper than Linda Ronstadt and Aaron Neville, a California pop rock singer known for reinventing herself across a dozen genres, and a New Orleans soul and R&B vocalist with one of the most distinctive falsettos in American music. When producer Peter Asher and songwriter Barry Mann brought them together for Don't Know Much in 1989, the result surprised almost everyone, including, by her own account, Ronstadt herself. The song became a massive crossover hit, reaching the top of multiple charts and earning both singers a Grammy Award. It led to a full album of duets, Cry Like a Rainstorm, Howl Like the Wind, and cemented one of the most unlikely but enduring vocal partnerships of the era. Neville has spoken since about how naturally their voices fit together despite coming from such different musical worlds, and the collaboration remains one of the clearest examples in Ronstadt's career of how her willingness to work outside her own genre repeatedly opened doors that a more cautious artist might have left closed. By the mid-2000s, something was wrong, though Ronstadt didn't yet know what. Her voice, once capable of moving effortlessly between rock belting and operatic control, had started to fail her. She described feeling like she was yelling instead of singing. She played what she considers her final concert on November 7, 2009, at the Brady Memorial Auditorium in San Antonio, though she didn't announce it as a retirement at the time. It wasn't until December 2012, while she was finishing her memoir Simple Dreams, that a neurologist gave her the diagnosis: Parkinson's disease. She revealed it publicly in 2013, telling AARP simply, "I can't sing a note." Doctors have since suggested her condition may in fact be a related disorder, progressive supranuclear palsy, which affects motor control of the vocal cords. "I now understand that no one can sing with Parkinson's disease," she said. "No matter how hard you try." There's no list of musicians Linda Ronstadt has named as people she hated, and looking honestly at her career, it's easy to see why that would ring false to anyone who knows the real story. What actually defined her relationships with other musicians was the opposite pattern. She built bands and handed them their independence. She trusted producers enough to follow them into genres that terrified her record label. And she formed friendships with peers like Parton and Harris that lasted for decades rather than dissolving into rivalry. The tension in her career, where it existed, wasn't backstage drama with named enemies. It was the very real professional risk of an artist who refused to stay in one lane. Executives doubted the Standards albums. Critics questioned the mariachi records that followed, rooted in her Mexican heritage. Audiences built around one version of her had to be won over again and again as she reinvented herself. That kind of friction, the kind between an artist and an industry that wanted her to stay predictable, is a far more interesting story than any invented feud, and it's the one that's actually true. Now 78, unable to sing, but still speaking clearly about the career that took her there, Ronstadt has said she doesn't get angry about what Parkinson's took from her. There's no point in it, she told CBS's Tracy Smith. She built her legacy across 5 decades and a dozen genres with the help of the people in this list, not in spite of them. And the record, the real one, shows a woman who was generous with credit far more often than she was bitter about betrayal. Thanks.